Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Beatriz Cantada. I use the she pronoun series. I work in the Institute Community and Equity Office, ICEO. We'd like to begin first with a land acknowledgement. MIT acknowledges Indigenous peoples as the traditional stewards of the land and the enduring relationship that exists between them and their traditional territories. The land on which we sit is a traditional unceded territory of the Wampanoag Nation. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced occupation of their territory, and we honor and respect the many diverse Indigenous people connected to this land on which we gather from time immemorial. We start with a land acknowledgement because Indigenous peoples have always practiced the honoring of guests as well as their hosts when visiting other nations and communities. So before we begin, I have a few acknowledgements. Thank you to our two producers, our resident bouncer, DJ Rachel O, and Aisha, who is our graduate community fellow. So a friendly reminder, please stay muted during the presentation. There will be an opportunity to ask questions towards the end, and feel free to unmute then. So some acknowledgements. We'd like to thank Dr. Tayo Akinwade, who is Valencia's host, John Dozier, Institute Community and Equity Office, and any of Valencia's colleagues at EECS. Welcome and thank you for joining us. I also want to acknowledge our cohort, the MLK Scholars current cohort. They are represented in this space. I see Luis Gilberto Murillo Urrutia, Sonia Smith, Craig Watkins, and Chris Dorsey. And Chris Dorsey, by the way, will be speaking on January 27th. So do watch out for that. And don't forget to register. And the good news is we will also be providing an Uber Eats voucher for all of the attendees in this call. And Rachel will paste the Uber Eats voucher for you to use. And I believe there is a time limit, but it is not just now, but you'll have at least several hours to use the Uber Eats voucher. We will have closed captioning, and this will be recorded. So our first speaker for 2022 is Dr. Valencia Koomson. She is an associate professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Tufts School of Engineering. Prior to joining Tufts, she held an appointment as a VLSI research engineer at the University of Southern California's Information Sciences Institute, where she performed research on the design of radiation-hardened analog/mixed signal VLSI systems in CMOS for military and space applications. Koomson is a former Marshall Scholar, Intel Foundation Scholar, National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellow, and a recipient of the NSF Faculty Early Career Development Award. I pass the virtual mic now to Valencia. Take it away, Valencia.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Beatrice. I'm going to share my screen here. Great. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for the warm introduction, Beatrice. And I, first of all, want to acknowledge MIT, the Provost Office, for being selected for the Martin Luther King Jr. Visiting Professor Fellowship this year. Is truly an honor and privilege to be able to apply and to receive the award. I am an associate professor at Tufts University in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering. My appointment here at MIT, my MLK appointment started actually in January of last year, 2021, and has now been extended till June, which I'm very thankful for. So I wanted to start off today. First of all, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to participate in the talk. And I see a number of friends and colleagues on the video call. So it's wonderful to see all of you. I wanted to start, first of all, talk a little bit about my journey, as this talk is about reflections on my journey to a faculty appointment in engineering. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about my background and my family and where I actually grew up. And so I'll start with my parents. My parents grew up in North Carolina with families who were sharecroppers at that time in Johnson County, North Carolina. They moved to Washington, D.C. in the 1960s during a period we call the Great Migration, when large numbers of African Americans moved from the South to the North for job opportunities and educational opportunities. And so my parents moved to Washington, D.C. and settled there, and they have lived there ever since. I grew up in D.C. In a very rich sort of environment of public school environment, and I'm a big advocate of public education. And so I wanted to highlight that aspect of my education. I went through public schools in Washington, D.C. throughout my whole education before moving to MIT. So I went to Banneker Academic High School, which is right across the street from Howard University. And so my early years, and I have a few acronyms of the institutions and places that really shaped me as a young adult growing up in Washington, D.C. I grew up in the Baptist Church. And I was very privileged to be able to participate in wonderful enrichment programs that were sponsored at Howard University, which is right in my neighborhood, and also the University of District of Columbia, UDC, a public institution in Washington, D.C., which many might not have heard a lot about, but which this UDC has made a really big impact upon young urban students in the DC area that attend public schools. At Xavier University in Louisiana, I also wanted to mention, as well, as I was selected as a senior as a junior between my junior and senior year of high school. I spent a summer there in a STEM enrichment program, similar to the MIT MITES program, but it was based at Xavier University, which was a wonderful opportunity just to kind of open the door to the possibilities of a career in engineering and science. En-ROADS as well. En-ROADS was a program that I participated in my first 2 years, my senior year of high school and my freshman year at MIT, which was a program that helped to place high school students with employers for summer employment throughout your undergraduate career, and also for college placement and college preparation. So types of initiatives were sponsored by En-ROADS. Great. So I left Washington, D.C. and really kind of entered into a whole nother world. That's how I felt moving into McCormick Hall and starting my first few days at MIT. It was like being on another planet, really, just your consciousness being open to a whole nother kind of level of activity that's going on right in your own country, but you were never aware of, really. No one in my family sort of had ever sort of finished college or gone to college or even attempted to study in the STEM area. So I started at Interphase. Interphase, I wanted to definitely mention Interphase. Interphase was a pivotal program for me. I don't think I probably would have stayed at MIT if I had not participated in the Interphase program, which was sponsored by the OME office. And so I came to campus a couple of months before the start of the freshman year, and just had a chance to really make MIT my home. A few weeks before all the freshmen, all students arrived back on campus for the fall semester. And so we spent that July and August, meeting faculty, taking classes. We took like an intro to 1801 and 801 during Interphase, and I had a group of friends, and I really felt like it was my home when September started, and it was a great start to my time at MIT. I had some wonderful mentors who I also want to mention. Professor Akinwande, who is my faculty host. He was my faculty advisor when I was at MIT, and was the advisor for my Master's of Engineering thesis. So Tayo and I have had a very long relationship and friendship over the past decades. Another mentor of mine, Larry Backow, very, very dear friend. He was my freshman advisor. So for freshman year, we were paired with faculty outside of our departments. And, you know, Larry at that time, he was my faculty advisor, Larry and Adele, and we've kept in touch over the decades as well. And as you know, Larry was president at MIT and now president at Harvard. I had a wonderful experience in lots of extracurricular activities at MIT. I'll just shout out a few of them: the MIT Gospel Choir, definitely the BSU. I had a experience studying abroad at Oxford University my junior year at MIT, which at the time was fairly rare for students to study abroad, particularly if you're an engineering major. But yes, a wonderful group of study abroad administrators that helped make that happen. And so I had a wonderful junior semester there studying Japanese. I started taking Japanese as my HAS concentration after joining the MIT Japan program my freshman year. So my freshman year, sophomore year, I started with the MIT Japan program, which had a language requirement, and we were required to study the Japanese language and also culture. We had a couple of classes in business culture in Japan. Again, it's just a phenomenal experience. I think I was drawn to that. I was drawn to my freshman year, there was an announcement for a pizza party at the MIT Japan program's office. And I ended up going and decided to join the program. So I spent my study abroad year taking language classes and cultural classes. And then I went for my internship in 1998, which was the summer after my senior year. I spent a summer in Toshiba. And so at Toshiba, I lived in Yokohama, Japan that summer, and stayed in the employee dormitories at that time. Toshiba had dormitories for their employees that were based in Yokohama, and I worked in the high-speed memory group. Very memorable experience, and had some time to explore across Japan, visiting various sites as well. Really experience that left a great impression upon me, because it was my first time sort of living for an extended period of time in sort of a very, very different culture. I mean, England is a different culture, but very similar to the American culture. I think my time in Asia and Japan was also very memorable in that respect. Living in a country that speaks a different language, which was which I really enjoy, and also not just experience studying abroad, but just living in Japan, but also the cultural immersion experience that was provided by MIT. So with that program, they didn't just kind of match you with an employer and give you a plane ticket and send you to Japan. There was 2 or 3 years of preparation before I even participated in that program. So I wanted to highlight that. Number of unique experiences. I think that experience abroad led me to, before I move on to my time in Cambridge, I have to mention here, in my last year, so I did the 5-year program at MIT. So my MN year, I remember getting a call from Lynn Hobbs. I believe Professor Hobbs is retired now, but Lynn Hobbs, he called me and said, I think he was the head of the foreign scholarships committee at MIT at that time. He said, I really think you should apply for the Marshall Scholarship. At that time, I was applying for the Rhodes, and he said, I really think you should apply to the Marshall. And I didn't really even know about the Marshall program, but he encouraged me to apply, and then he arranged a meeting with Larry, and I talked to Larry, so they could have double teamed me a little bit, and had me apply to the Marshall program, which really just changed the course of my career, really. And I had already gotten admission to the PhD program at MIT, and Larry said, well, if you stay at MIT and then you apply for a faculty position here, they'll always kind of treat you as a student. It might be a good idea for you to think about going and doing a PhD abroad. Cambridge has an excellent program there. Maybe you should consider that. And so we talked about that extensively, and I decided to apply, and I ended up selecting University of Cambridge as the institution to carry out the Marshall Scholarship. So I remember that year in 1999, I think there were about 6 Marshall and Rhodes Scholars from MIT, which was a high number for that year. And so we ended up, I ended up going to University of Cambridge, funded by a Marshall Scholarship and an NSF Graduate Research Fellowship. And which was eye-opening to me because I didn't realize the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship did travel abroad too. So it was great. I had 2 years of funding from the Marshall Scholarship, then another 3 years of funding from the NSF. So they gave me 5 years of funding to complete my studies. I did a Master's of Philosophy there, the University of Cambridge, and a PhD. In addition, that the year I traveled there, that was 1999. In 2000, the Cambridge MIT Exchange Program was launched, and that initiative brought a number of MIT students to Cambridge to study. And I remember that vividly because there was a research group which was more of a social scientist educational research group that was a part of the Cambridge MIT Exchange that was based at the University of Cambridge. And their goal was to really try to kind of, they wanted to find out what was the real secret sauce at MIT. And that's what they call it. What's the secret sauce? What is it that makes MIT a place that really encourages students to think creatively and to engage in entrepreneurial activities? And that was something that they wanted to bring to the University of Cambridge, was to really to spark more of an interest amongst students at the undergraduate and graduate level to pursue ventures and startup ventures, particularly in the School of Engineering. And so I joined along because they found out that there was a former MIT student who was on, at the university. A lot of folks jumped at the chance to talk to me because they were trying to kind of figure out how they navigate MIT a little bit. And they were planning a site visit to MIT, and they were trying to make sense of all those numbers, what all these numbers actually mean. They were being encouraged to meet with faculty in course 16, course 6, course 1. And, I kind of helped them with a bit of logistics there. And so it was a really great experience for me because it really helped to guide my teaching philosophy, thinking about how do you create learning environments and courses that help to help students with deep learning, but also to help them to think creatively. And how do you create authentic learning experiences that engage students in solving and in using their skills to address real world problems? And that was what the research, that was the focus of the research study. So I spent about 1.5 years with that research team, which was a great way to kind of get a couple of trips back to campus as well. I traveled with them twice, actually, to campus to meet Professor, I believe, David Newman in course 16, and also Professor Einstein in course 1. We spent time with those two faculty through that project. And so after leaving Cambridge, I started to kind of think about my research career. I wanted I knew I wanted to pursue an academic career at that point. And I wanted to find out, okay, what do I want to, as a professor, what will I profess, right? Professor, what will be the types of research activities that I want to spend the next coming decades focused on? And so I started as a launch point. My research work at that point was in the area of microelectronics, microscale electronics. And so this is a picture I want to just kind of to impress upon the point. This is a picture of one of the first computers, right? This is one of the first computers built by IBM during the World War II era. And as you can see, it's a large room. It's basically the size of a 2-bedroom apartment here in the Boston area. And as you can see, what we've done over the past 7 decades is moved from computing machines that are fill rooms to things that can be embedded onto a piece of semiconductor material that can fit in your hand, your pocket. And we have this dizzying array of computing devices that are really based on our ability to be able to build electrical systems at a that make them tinier, smaller and smaller, and pack more functionality onto the chip. And so that was the core of my research area. And we know how we've all interacted with microchip technology in some shape or form from the time we wake up in the morning until, throughout the day. Whether it be it's looking at self-driving, what we've been able to do with self-driving car technology, smartphone technology that just brings an array of functionality right at your fingertips, to wearable devices that can be used to monitor your health. Okay, and so I started to kind of really think about how can we use microchip technology in the area of health. Now, it took a while to kind of get to really find my way there. I started off with, being a tenure track faculty member, you kind of start off your research, you kind of launch from your PhD research. And so from my PhD research, I started off focusing on wireless communication. And so that was my research focus as a graduate student. And my first couple of years at MIT, at Tufts, I started to work on design of nanoscale sensors and systems that can be used to extend the reach of wireless communication devices. And so I just want to highlight one or two projects. I won't highlight everything that I've done over the past 16 years, but I want to kind of give some big highlights. One of the areas I wanted to highlight is this area of light-enabled systems and applications. So I spent about 7 years connected with a NSF-funded engineering research center. And in this center, the questions we were trying to ask is, how can we use indoor lighting systems that can do more than just provide indoor illumination? So at the time, light emitting diodes were kind of really being propelled as the technology of the future to bring about very energy efficient lighting. Okay, want to look at lighting systems that can reduce the carbon footprint, right? And reduce the amount of energy that's needed to light indoor spaces. And as you think about it, if I replace all of my indoor lighting with LEDs, now I have this light source that I can actually modulate to send data as well. I can use that light as a communications channel. I can actually send data using that light bulb. Very similar to the way in which we send light signals over fiber optic networks to connect for the backbone telecommunications infrastructure. And so how do we build such systems? And that was the focus of my research was, how do we build light bulbs and we can and embed them with microchip technology and use that microchip technology to make the light bulb smarter. Right? Smarter in the sense that it can do more than just provide light. It can provide data. We can actually control the light such that we can control the quality of the light. What I mean by quality of the light, I can actually manipulate that light bulb such that certain wavelengths of light are emitted to form white light. And maybe I can shape the spectral response of that light bulb such that it mimics the sunlight, right? Or we can mix the colors within the LED lighting source such that it could actually help to improve the rate at which people can heal and recover in a hospital setting. There is decades of research that looked at the use of certain wavelengths within a white light bulb and how it can affect mood, circadian rhythm, and a whole host of health benefits that could be quite useful if we could be able to do that. In terms of indoor, sorry, let me go back. My PowerPoint is going ahead of me here. In terms of networking, we wanted to look at how do we move from a Wi-Fi system, which we use using radio signals, to what we call a LiFi system. So using light for indoor networking. And so, we kind of think about, well, why go to Wi-Fi? Why move from Wi-Fi to LiFi? Wi-Fi works just as well, right? It has a number of benefits that using a LED doesn't have. But we realize that, most wireless networking actually happens indoors. And most wireless networking is a fixed point accessing, meaning that we're not, when you're using the Wi-Fi network, typically it's people sitting down in office spaces in front of computers, like in an educational setting, students sitting in a fixed location with a laptop or a tablet. In a healthcare setting, it could possibly be used to send data to an operating theater where you're remotely manipulating robotic surgical tools, for example, or in a entertainment setting, or in a indoor space like a museum, where you want to transmit educational information about an exhibit to users, to visitors to the space, or in something like a commercial airplane, right? Where you have people sitting on a plane, they're typically fixed in their position. You're typically using the media tools in an airplane fixed at your seat. How could we possibly use the light, the LED in the lighting environment to actually transmit media and video streaming in those kinds of environments? So we looked at a niche set of environments and looked at how we could build microchip technology that could enable a plethora of applications where we're using the lighting environment in a new way. And so that was 7 years of funding through the ERC with a number of patents awarded and publications in terms of the work that we did in this area. After completing that work, I started to sort of think about other types of wireless networking technology, particularly looking at 60 gigahertz and very high frequency millimeter wave integrated circuit design. We wanted to sort of, as we think beyond traditional radio wireless networking, how can we build integrated systems where, again, moving away from large bulky instruments to more miniaturized, localized types of sensing and radio transmission. And here we investigated the use of various magnetic materials, particularly hexaferrite materials that operate in the 30 to gigahertz range. How do we integrate these materials into modern semiconductor CMOS technology? How do we integrate that in a way in which we can build systems that can do new things, new and exciting applications? Okay, I mentioned CMOS technology. I don't have a lot of acronyms here in this talk, but this acronym is fairly important because CMOS represents a key technology that is really the underlying technology behind modern computing devices, right? The CMOS, complementary metal oxide semiconductor, using semiconductor materials where you can manipulate the conductivity of the material and build systems that are smaller and have more functionality. So we sort of investigated nanomaterial fabrication in a standard CMOS processing technology, and how we can build millimeter wave integrated circuits that can break and relieve bandwidth bottlenecks for wireless gateways at the 60 gigahertz range. And this was in collaboration with Corvo, my industry partner and colleagues at Tufts. And so, yeah, so again, how does this move me towards my real aim is how do we bring microelectronic circuit technology into the healthcare arena? I wanted to just as an overview, this is just a pictorial, a conceptual diagram of the work we did on designing millimeter wave circulators. And I'll highlight this component because it's significant. If you think about radio transmission, we're building systems where typically we have two antennas one for transmitting and one for receiving. We can reduce the size of a radio system if we can actually use the same antenna for both transmission and receiving. And this is what a circulator tries to do. It is what we call a non-reciprocal device. It allows you to be able to transmit radio waves. You can actually transmit and receive from the same antenna. And so, as you can imagine, the ability to be able to do that allows us to be able to build systems that you could possibly integrate a radio transceiver on the tip of a catheter, for example, maybe to implant into the body, and to use millimeter wave technology to do tissue spectroscopy and to investigate areas within the body that you couldn't normally do using without having components integrated into a very small microchip. And so we designed a number of novel fabrication techniques to integrate nanoferrite thin films and depositing and patterning them on silicon and gallium nitride substrates from this particular project. And then I moved on to looking in the area of biology and medicine, actually. And this is where we were looking at how we look at modern computing technology and how microchips have really transformed every aspect of human life in the area of computing and in terms of e-commerce and a number of applications. But how can we bring those performance gains into the medicine, in biology and medicine, either to improve health outcomes, reduce healthcare costs, or to make healthcare delivery more accessible to more people? And so in the area of biology and medicine, we're focusing in the area of near-infrared imaging, in vivo analyte sensing, and microfluidic systems. So I want to highlight one key project in this space. And then I'll lastly talk about my research in the area of global health. So one of my first projects in this area, looked at preterm infants. And so I was at a talk and the focus was on preterm infants. And there are a large number of babies that are born early here in the US and globally. Nearly 500,000 here in the US and 15 million worldwide. How do you monitor these fragile lives at the point of care, at the bedside? And one of the challenges there, 1 second here. Let's see. Nearly over half of the babies that are born premature are at risk of death and brain damage due to inadequate oxygen flow to the brain. One of the ways in which babies are monitored in terms of brain health is using MRI. But as you can imagine, it's very expensive to do MRI monitoring. And it's really just practically not feasible when most babies are born preterm babies are born under 2 pounds. And we have this large machine that is monitoring such a small baby. And another reason why it becomes infeasible, because for MRI monitoring you have to be still, and it's hard to keep a newborn baby still without having to use restraints that are just not practical to do. And so the issue is, can we develop technology that allows us to monitor brain health right at the bedside, right inside the incubator in the NICU environment? And so near-infrared spectroscopy is a technology that's pioneered decades ago, back in the 70s. And it relies on our ability to be able to invest into probe the optical contrast between an important protein in blood that is responsible for delivering oxygen to cells throughout the body, and that's hemoglobin. Okay, hemoglobin, we have deoxygenated hemoglobin and oxygenated hemoglobin. And the goal is that if we can look at this protein and the absorption of this protein in a certain region of the near-infrared spectrum, we could feasibly be able to determine how much oxygen is actually flowing through cells to various tissue within the body. Now, near-infrared spectroscopy, sounds like a very far off technology, but it's actually one in which we are all very familiar with. You might not have recognized that. We use it all the time. When you go to the doctor, the first thing they do is put on your finger what we call a pulse oximeter. And that pulse oximeter is doing exactly what I just showed. It's actually trying to measure how much the oxygen saturation in the arterial veins in your body by measuring the amount of absorption of the hemoglobin protein in your blood. And what it does, it uses two wavelengths of light, and it shines that light through your finger. And there's a detector on the other side of your finger that measures how much light is actually received. And by determining how much light is received at the detector, we can, and using two wavelengths, we can actually determine how the relative concentration of those two proteins, oxygenated and deoxygenated hemoglobin, we can determine the relative absorption of those two, of those chromophores in the blood. And from those data points, we can actually measure how much the oxygen saturation in the arterial. Now, there are a couple of, this is a very sort of simplistic sort of overview of near-infrared spectroscopy, but it sort of makes the point. We have this ability to be able to use a light source that we can buy off the shelf that's commercially available. It's inexpensive to buy. That's why we can buy them. You can buy it off the shelf at CVS, because of the fact that there has been the advancements that have been made in terms of research into the development of very small scale and fabrication techniques to be able to manufacture these kinds of light sources in the near infrared region. And because they're so readily available, we can also build very cheap microsystems to be able to process and analyze the data. We have a consumer product that works very well and is quite useful, particularly in the COVID pandemic. Being able to monitor your oxygen saturation at home has really been a life-saving tool for millions of people across the globe, having this particular technology. And so what we wanted to do is to see if we could expand upon this. And there has been a wealth of literature or in terms of diffuse optical spectroscopy and tissue spectroscopy theory that has said that we can actually do better than the pulse oximeter. We can not only just measure the relative saturation, the relative amount of saturated oxygen saturated hemoglobin in your blood. We can actually measure the absolute concentration of these two important chromophores. But to do it, it requires quite some expensive equipment to be able to do it. And I'm just showing here, I just wanted, in terms of overview, we can go from just measuring the relative absorption of near-infrared light in tissue to actually measuring the time delay of the light signal as it passes through the tissue. If we can measure both a time feature associated with light travel through the tissue as well as absorption, it allows us a significant amount of information that enables us to be able to measure the absolute concentration of these types of proteins, of this biomarker in the blood. And I use the word biomarker because there are a number of biomarkers in the blood that can be measured in this way. And so what we focused on doing was using near-infrared spectroscopy for general analyte sensing. And what this does is opens up new pathways for in vivo optical characterization of biological structures. Looking at ways in which we can understand spatial temporal variations in absorption and scattering in diffuse biological media like tissue. So tissue is a diffuse biological media. There are other type organelles in the body as well that are also what we call diffuse biological media. Deriving blood oxygen saturation levels and organelle concentration, and computing the absolute concentration of these various chromophores. And what that does, it gives us the ability to design systems that can be used for functional brain studies. And as we know, based on the type of activity that you're performing, the concentration of oxygen to the brain changes. So it opens up the ability to do functional brain studies, optical mammography. We can we can actually do a three-dimensional map, or two-dimensional and three-dimensional maps of the changes in concentration of important chromophores in tissue using this technique. And we can actually correlate the concentrations of these chromophores to the presence of a benign or malignant tumor. And so these techniques are being investigated in the area for breast cancer detection, and also for neonatal monitoring at the bedside. Okay. And as I mentioned previously, wanting to kind of understand the changes in oxygenated blood to the brain in these fragile lives in the beds. And at the moment, the only way in which we can actually measure what's going on in terms of oxygen flow to the brain is by measuring the oxygen saturation in the toe of an infant, and try to correlate that, which is very grossly inadequate for the types of analysis that we need to do at the brain. So our research is, here's a picture of the NICU environment. As you can imagine, there are a number of different vitals that are being monitored at the bedside. How can we make this device such that it is non-obtrusive, and it doesn't add to the physical space of the environment around the incubator? And here is our vision: is a patch that can be worn on the forehead. So a patch that allows us to be able to embed all of our optical sensors and detectors into sort of a wearable platform where we've integrated into a very small physical space our power technology, our optical sources and detectors to transmit optical signals and receive them, and then a custom integrated circuit, which we have patented, that actually processes those signals that are being received in the system. And then we can wirelessly transmit that data out to a mobile device without the need for any wires or any additional equipment that would be obtrusive in this space. So this is our overall vision, and this is kind of this is the system design. This is the conceptual diagram of what we're working towards. And again, as you can imagine, our goal is how do we actually build this integrated system in a way. And our first, I'll say Mark I or prototype device is built here. We have our patented chip, actually, that's been fabricated in a 130 nanometer silicon germanium commercial process. And we are testing out that chip actually through a human validation study at the MIT Clinical Research Center, which is actually the focus of my MLK fellowship year, is working with the Clinical Research Center to carry out this human validation study, which has the Clinical Research Center, which just opened, I believe, just last year, provides a wealth of sort of expertise, both and on the clinical side. There is a nurse practitioner who is on site there that helps with developing the protocols for this type of study. We've gone through the IRB process to make sure our device is safe for use on adults. So this first study is on adults, actually. And we've gone through the rigorous process of characterizing our device in terms of safety limits, laser safety limits that are required to meet for use on humans. And yes, and so we're in the beginning phases of actually developing our prototype in a way that is robust and repeatable measurements that we can actually perform on humans. Great. In the area of engineering for human health, our second project in which I have, let me just go back there. One of my second key project, which is the focus of my fellowship year, is on microfluidic systems to measure cell-to-cell communication. So here, we're looking at non-invasive studies of gap junction communication. And why is gap junction communication important? Well, we realize that as cells grow and develop, they actually, there is some communication that goes on electrically between cells. as they go through the morphogenetic process. And we want to be able to probe that, that communication. Actually, what I call is eavesdropping actually on what's happening at the cellular level as cells grow and develop over time. And so we built this microfluidic platform, and the MIT Nano Lab has been a great resource for us to use in developing a microfluidic system that allows us to be able to grow cells and grow electronic systems and have them coexist in the same sort of platform in a way that it's healthy for the cells and increases their vitality, and also gives us a very an accurate measurement of the electrical conductivity of the cell layer. And so this is just a picture of a number of rat kidney cells that have been cultured onto our microfluidic device here. Okay, great. And lastly, I want to I want to highlight one project in the area of global health. So we talked about micro-scale devices that can be used to measure biomarkers in the blood. And here we're kind of expanding to look at, once we have these type of devices, how do we interface those devices with mobile apps and with within a telehealth monitoring infrastructure, such that someone remotely, a clinical provider, could actually read that data and actually do something useful with it. And so the AHOMKA Global Mobile Health Network is a project that has been 2.5 years in the developmental stages, and it's a collaborative project with the University of Ghana Medical School. And the goal is, can we build mobile applications where we have maximized the efficiency of that mobile app and its usability in the local context. So culturally adapting technology such that it works within the healthcare workflow in the country, in particular settings, and actually technology and apps that actually people want to use. You know, if you go to the App Store, there are thousands of apps that help you with losing weight, with managing diabetes and all types of chronic illnesses. But there has been very little research on the usability of these apps, and actually why don't people use them more often, given the health advantages that they bring. You know, we use apps for everything, really, you know, for downloading music and video, for e-commerce. But in terms of monitoring health, it has been a slow progress. And so this research study is both a qualitative study, and I'll go through some of the aims of this project in more detail. But the goal is really, can we build a mobile platform that both clinical providers and patients will actually use? And then if they do use it, how can we use that platform to actually help people control their blood pressure? So we're focusing on hypertension for a number of reasons. This work is funded by the NIH through the Mobile Health Technology Outcomes in Low and Middle Income Countries program, which is out of the Fogarty International Center in NIH, and the National Institute of Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering. And I'll just go over a couple of aims of the project. We focus here on hypertension just because of the global burden of hypertension and the staggering numbers of uncontrolled hypertension that we find across the globe. It's estimated, this is from the World Health Organization, that hypertension causes about nearly 13% of all deaths globally are due to some complication, either complication due to hypertension. Hypertension leads to other sort of acute events like stroke and heart attack and cardiovascular diseases. And 70% of adults with hypertension live in low and middle income countries. So this is the motivating factor behind this project and our focus on hypertension. Here are just a snapshot of our partnerships for this mobile health technology development project. We have a number of academic institutions, both Tufts, University of Ghana Medical School, and the University of Health and Allied Sciences in Ghana. These are two large academic institutions that have teaching hospitals that serve a wide population of people in the country. And we chose these two institutions, one, because they're both embedded in two geographically different areas of the country, one in an urban setting, that's in Accra, the capital city of Ghana, and then in Ho, which is a more of a rural area of Ghana. And so we want to look at how do we adapt the technology in two different settings as part of this project. We also have Beth Israel here in Boston, which is one of our collaborators, the Ghana Health Service and the Ministry of Health. And our industry partner is Medtronic Labs. Thank you. So in terms of the aims of the program, I'll just quickly go through them. We want to culturally adapt this mobile platform to track blood pressure, to help with controlling hypertension in populations there. And we want to use a user-centered iterative design process where the clinical providers and patients are involved in developing this platform. We're conducting human subject studies in Ghana to look at the acceptability and feasibility of the platform. And then how do we interface, going back to our wearable health devices, how do we interface all types of wearable health devices with this platform for continuous ambulatory monitoring of human vital signs like blood pressure and electrocardiogram data. And then developing predictive risk models to see how does hypertension affect the progression of various cardiovascular diseases by collecting data on patients. And again, wanting to want capacity development and capacity building in the country for mobile health interventions is another key aim here of the funding for this project. I wanted to just kind of talk about how I began this collaboration with Ghana. My husband is from Ghana, and we started on my trips, on my visits there to visit my family there. I started meeting with the computer engineering department, and I developed a wonderful collaboration with the computer engineering department at the University of Ghana in Legon. And each year for the past 7 or 8 years, I've co-advised master's students and undergraduate students on their design projects. One of them is what we call the Lean On app. So it's an app that helps with managing weight, for weight management. And so we wanted to develop an app where people could actually track their macronutrients. So not just, how many calories did I eat, but actually the quality of those calories, right? Realizing that 100 calories of spinach is very different from 100 calorie, candy bar, right? So, so the students built this wonderful app that allows you to be able to input your daily, your food, maybe what you ate for breakfast and what you ate for lunch. They put in data, they built a database of food that's commonly eaten in Ghana. So it's, based around the local cultural context there. Most of the apps you can download from the App Store really only access data that folks, in the US and Europe actually eat. So they built this database, and actually what the app does, there's a predictive algorithm there such that if you put in your goals in terms of carbohydrate, protein, and sugar intake for the day, it will track your macronutrients for breakfast and lunch, and then it can give you suggestions on what you should eat for dinner in order to keep within your macronutrient goals, right? So if you've had a large meal for breakfast and lunch, it will, advise you on the appropriate calories to eat for dinner to keep within your goal. So that was a paper we recently published. I highlight this because conducting global health research with collaborators in different countries and with students can be quite challenging. But over probably like a 2-year effort, we were able to actually conduct the research, conduct a feasibility study with human subjects, and actually publish a paper that was recently published about 2 months ago in the International Journal of Telemedicine Applications. So just to wrap up, I wanted to end with just a couple of future research directions that have come about just during my time here at the MLK program. It's an exciting time to be in the global health space. One of the things that I am working on during my extension of the MLK fellowship is, we're trying to set up a data set challenge. So MIT has a rich data set of electrocardiogram data that's been collected over decades. Most of that data is on patients from US hospitals. And what we're trying to look at is, if you build AI models and machine learning models that have been trained using data sets from certain populations, like Western populations, how does that work on a data set how does that work when you're using it in a different context? So developing more diverse electrophysiological data sets that can be used for AI to solve challenging AI problems and to build machine learning models is one of my future research directions. Again, more functionality in terms of arrhythmia classification. We're working on a cuffless blood pressure monitoring system and focusing on hard to manage chronic illnesses like sickle cell. Is another future research direction. And so I want to end there to kind of give some time for questions. And thank you for listening. Thank you.
We have about a minute or so for any questions or comments. And I see a lot of clapping hands. So thank you, Valencia.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, any comments? Feel free to unmute.
I have a particular question about the sickle cell anemia because I've had the future direction because I've had a couple friends with that. So could you just briefly tell about that application? And of course, it affects people of color disproportionately. So
yes, thank you, Professor Colbert. For your question. Yes. And so we're looking at crisis events, which are very unpredictable. And, sickle cell is a very understudied disease. And so, how can we help patients with sickle cell manage the crisis at home? And at least to be able to give them some warning signals. I mean, are there biomarkers that we can actually track that can predict the onset of a crisis event? That's what we want to try to do. At the moment, it's very unpredictable, and it can take a week out of your life to kind of have to deal with a crisis event. Also, objective measures of pain, right? There's been an issue with, particularly with African-American patients not being able to get proper pain opioid management when in a crisis event, just because there aren't a lot of objective measures of pain. The physician is relying on the patient to say how much pain they're in. But if you had some way of, and the near-infrared spectroscopy tools are showing some usefulness in this area to give objective measures of pain as well. And at least to give the clinical provider some data to be able to see some longitudinal data so they can see kind of how the disease has progressed over a period of time, and to give an adequate care and appropriate care from patient to patient. Thank you for your question.
Other comments? I'm going to look at the chat to see if there are any hand raises. Again, feel free to unmute.
I was just going to say really quickly, thank you, Valencia, for that really great presentation. Looking forward to future opportunities to engage you and learn more about your work. This was fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you.